Maybe it's just me, but I feel like every single time that a new Trails game is released, this question inevitably is asked, and it's just, can't I just start right here? Or do I have to start from the beginning? And also, what's this series all about, and what's the big deal about Trails? People just seem to get so overwhelmed and confused by this series, so I want to come here and try to just kind of set the record straight and tell you everything that you need to know about this long-running series, including answering the question, can't you just start with Trails through Daybreak? And I think that's something that's worth subscribing for, as I do try my best to hit my dream goal of 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year, and I do think that with your help, I will be able to reach that goal. So thank you so much for subscribing, and also hitting that like button for me. And now, let me go ahead and get started going through this series in the most spoiler-free way possible. I'm going to be structuring this in such a way to kind of give you like a brief overview of what the whole series is about, as well as what each title entails, without really diving deep into any sort of like spoiler territory at all, so don't worry about that. And while there are some games that do predate Trails in the Sky, they're just not relevant to this discussion, as here I just want to go over the modern day Trails series. In Trails in the Sky first chapter, you're introduced to the continent of Zemuria and the various countries that inhabit it, most notably Erebonia, Calvard, Crossbell, and Lerburl, where Trails in the Sky takes place. And here, you play as Joshua and Estelle, who are essentially raised as brother and sister, but because Joshua was adopted, they are not related by blood. And once they do come of age, their father sends them off to become bracers, which essentially means that they just kind of do like odd jobs around the countryside to keep the peace and protect the civilians. And here is a major theme in the Trails series, because in each arc, you're going to be essentially being like a bracer in all but name. You might be a cop in Crossbell, a student in Erebonia, or a Spriggan in Calvard. But no matter what you call it, you're still doing odd jobs around the countryside to keep the peace and protect the civilians. It's really the same job, just by another name. Some of these different quests will be required to move the story along, although many of them will be optional, and they just serve to flesh out the world, get to know the characters, and kind of send you off the beaten track. And some will serve to give you some pretty sweet rewards too. But another theme with the series is that you're graded at the end of each chapter based upon not only how many of these quests that you've completed, but also how well you performed in those side quests. And the grading isn't just some kind of like useless arcade point system that nobody cares about. It actually matters, because you do get real, in-game tangible rewards for meeting certain thresholds. In fact, some of the most powerful items in the entire game can only be obtained by completing each and every side quest. So I mentioned chapters, and that's yet another Trails theme. Every game is broken up into multiple different chapters, and for the most part, each chapter revolves around a certain town. In Trails in the Sky, you might take an airship to that town, while in Crossbell, a much smaller country, you might just walk there. In vast Erebonia, you might take a train, while in Calvard, you'll probably just kind of like hop into your car and drive on over there. And once you do get to your destination, you'll do your quests, complete the main story, and then more than likely also receive a couple of new characters until your party is fully fleshed out, and then you move on to beat the game. That's pretty much the structure of how these Trails games are all laid out. But now I want to talk about each different arc and what they entail and what the good starting points are as well. So let's start with the very first arc, the Trails in the Sky trilogy. As you traipse around the incredibly peaceful kingdom of Lerburl, you'll also learn about the antagonists of the entire series, Ouroboros. And don't just think of these villains as like normal big baddies that you kill and then you just move on, because it doesn't work that way. In typical anime fashion, these guys just never die, and you'll get to know these villains over the course of many different games, as they'll keep on rearing their ugly heads whenever you least expect it. And while everything does seem peaceful on the surface during Estelle and Joshua's journey, they do get embroiled into an attempted coup. Thankfully though, they are able to stop it. Now the second game actually picks up directly following the first game. It's literally the very next morning. And here in second chapter, Estelle sets off on a journey to find Joshua and tell him her feelings for him, while also saving the Burrow from Ouroboros yet again. The final game of the trilogy is kind of an odd bird. We're introduced to a brand new protagonist, Kevin Graham, and he, as well as the other characters from Lerburl, are sent off into another dimension known as Phantasma. And there, Kevin works with them in order to investigate this different dimension and figure out how to best escape it. It's honestly just kind of like a fan servicey game where you can kind of like build up your dream team together, But the big deal here are the doors that you can enter, which gives major character development as well as foreshadows massive plot elements from future games, or even gives background information on countries that you never visit in the other games. Quite honestly though, if you would like to, this entry is entirely skippable, but it is also much shorter than the previous two games, and I still do think that it's worth a playthrough. The next game in the series, Trails from Zero, leaves the borough behind and instead enters the tiny city-state of Crossbell, which is nestled between the massive countries of Erebonia and Calvar. This is a brand new arc, and as such, it could be a good place to enter the series. However, quite a bit of characters do return from Trails in the Sky series. Estelle, Joshua, and Ren all play pretty big roles here, so you might be lost if you don't at least play the first and second chapter before starting up Trails from Zero. Here though, you play as Lloyd, a member of the SSS, which is a branch of the police force, and they're essentially kind of like detectives, which really means that they're the bracers of this game. They do their best to keep the peace in Crossbell from all the underworld gangs and drug smugglers that seem to control things, because the government of Crossbell itself is rather ineffectual. In fact, Crossbell's not really an independent state at all. It's under the joint control of both Erebonia and Calvard. That is, until its sequel Trails from Zero hits the scene just a couple of months after the events of the first game, and there, the new mayor declares Crossbell independent, which causes a major war to break out, and it ends with Crossbell's annexation by the Erebonian Empire. Now, let me talk about Trails of Cold Steel itself. This arc consists of 4 different games, and it follows Reen, a student at Thor's military academy in Erebonia, who's part of the Special Class 7, and he's a member of the student council where he does odd jobs, bracer jobs. And the story of the first game follows Class 7 throughout the school year, focusing on various field studies throughout the Empire, where they witness firsthand the problems of the Empire, which is pretty much consumed in a power struggle between the aristocratic nobles and the more working class common men. Class 7, though, is a mixture of both nobles and commoners, so they do have a unique outlook on this as they do their best to observe and keep the peace. But unfortunately, they fail as eventually the two factions come to a head and civil war breaks out between the nobles and the reformists. Trails of Cold Steel 2 takes place 1 month after the events of Cold Steel 1, and also concurrently alongside the final chapter of Trails of Azure. And Reen and his friends are scattered around the countryside and also in hiding, so it's up to him to put an end to the Civil War and save his family too. And now it's here that I really do need to discuss something. Well, the first 2 Cold Steel games really can be standalone, and they can be a fantastic place to start the series. It's the latter 2 games where all the other characters from the previous arcs come into play. And honestly, if you're like me and you played these games in the Western release order, you probably played Cold Steel before you played Crossbell, and that's honestly a perfectly fine way to play them. But do keep in mind that both Zero and Azure do take place concurrently with the first 2 games of Cold Steel, so the events are going to be happening at the exact same time, which means that yes, you should play Crossbell before you do play Cold Steel, and as I said before, it's also a good idea to play Sky before playing Crossbell. In this way, these 3 arcs are all connected to each other, not to mention that in Cold Steel, Lloyd and the SSS do play a rather big role, especially in the later 2 games. Trails of Cold Steel 3 takes place 2 years after the events of Cold Steel 2, and here Reen has graduated and has become an instructor at the Thor's military academy, and he's the new teacher of the new Class 7, where he's ordered by the government to resolve a bunch of different conflicts arising all across Erebonia, which are mostly caused by Ouroboros. And it's here that Lloyd and the rest of the SSS come on into Erebonia, and it's almost like the Crossbell duology and the Cold Steel quadrilogy merge into one large final arc of like 6 whole games. Finally though, the whole thing is wrapped up in Cold Steel 4 as they put down the threats of the Civil War once and for all. So now, that leaves us at the beginning of a brand new arc, Trails Through Daybreak, which just recently released, and this takes place clear across the other side of the country in Calvard. And because of that, there's not a whole lot of crossover between this arc and the previous 3 arcs. Yeah, you will see some characters appear here and there, but it's no one like so major, and no one really joins up with your party either that you've seen before. They're really just kind of there as nods and fan service. You really do have an entirely new cast of characters here to fall in love with. And because of this, Trails Through Daybreak is actually a fantastic place to start the series, You're in a brand new country with a brand new party, and it has a brand new battle system too. Now, that's not to say that this arc is completely divorced from the rest of the series, because it's not, and you still would benefit from playing the other games first. But I also feel like it can be quite the overwhelming task in order to do all that, and sometimes you just need to find a place to start. And I'm telling y'all, this is a great place to do that. So if you're looking to start the series, now is the time to do it. The other 3 arcs are all connected. This one really is its own standalone thing. So I do hope that this video helped you understand the background and lore of this long-running, massive series, because there's a lot to absorb here and a lot to take in. But really, my number one takeaway from this video that I want you to pick up is, just pick up a game that you might like and start there. Maybe you'll start at Sky, maybe Zero, maybe Cold Steel 1, or maybe the brand new Daybreak. But the important thing is just to start, because I guarantee that once you do, you will not regret it. So now, I want to know in the comments, what do you feel about this series and which ones are your favorite, and what do you think is also a good starting point? Let's all talk about it. And if you like this video, here's another one that I think that you're really going to enjoy, so please do make sure to check that out. And as always, have a good day.